it's kind of interesting to go and see a movie that you've worked on in a theater because you don't have much control over how well tuned that theater is. And when you're used to sitting in a mixed theater that's been calibrated perfectly, you know, and you're making mixed decisions and creative calls in that room, and then you go to a theater that maybe hasn't been calibrated so recently, it can be a little frustrating. My name is Nathan Robitaille. I was the sound designer and supervising sound editor on Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water.
Eliza, come on. Eliza, hurry, hurry.
There were some beautiful special challenges with Shape of Water. The script sort of says it all. This is a story about a mute woman who falls in love with a verbally expressive, non-linguistic, amphibious man. And so, you know, reading that script, it was exciting and at the same time a little bit daunting because, you know, we have to convey a lot of dialogue between two lead characters that don't speak any language. And so that brought about a challenge in itself. For me personally, the big challenge there was the creature. We needed to create a creature that didn't just roar to scare you or squeal to signify pain. We needed to show curiosity, empathy, affection, frustration, humiliation. We need to be able to show a full range of emotions. And classically, when developing creatures, it's fairly common to simply reach for animal sound effects, and in a sense that can help, and it did play in for the Fishman in Shape of Water, but the bulk of that work was actually my own voice and the voice of Guillermo to create his sound, only because we knew the audience would be able to empathize with the emotions that we could perform with our voices. Given how deep and how wide that range needed to be, we knew that using human voices would be kind of the go-to.
This may very well be the most sensitive asset ever to be housed in this facility.
You may think that thing looks human. Stands on two legs, right? But we're created in the Lord's image. You don't think that's what the Lord looks like, do you?
The job of a sound editor, in my case, specifically a sound effects editor, to answer the first question, the job of a sound editor is to take sounds that may be either cluttered or distorted, or are fighting for space in the mix to be heard, and to make them more clear. So for a dialogue editor, that would be making sure that every line of dialogue is clear and clean, that there aren't, you know, airplanes going by overhead or clothing rustles getting in the way of understanding what the actor is trying to say. For a sound effects editor, it's a little bit different because we sort of start with a blank slate. And it is basically a layering approach to building up an environment and then add every sound that you hear in the world that is not performed by a human being. So things like doors, toasters, car engines, all the way up to explosions, airplanes, physical combat, creatures in the case of Shape of Water. And so sound effects editors, we just make sure that if the mixers wanted to, if the director were to choose to turn down all dialogue that was recorded on set, they could, and you would still hear everything that you see on screen. That takes place in combination with Foley artists' work, and they sort of fill in the rest of the human element of the soundtrack in a film. So as editors, we turn to a library or microphones to capture, record, and replace all sounds that you see on screen. Foley artists are the ones performing the human sound. So anything that we would interact with as a human, clothing moves, handling objects in the world, footsteps, any of that sort of stuff, a Foley artist will go through and perform to fill out that part of the track.
When he looks at me, he does not know how I am incomplete. He sees me as I am.
My educational background is, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I would say a lot of the education that I gained that is practical in my current line of work came from my line of work. I took a job while I was in high school. I was very young. I was 17 years old with a company called Sound Dogs Toronto. I was working for a guy named Nelson Ferreira. Nelson worked with me on Shape of Water as well, so he and I have been together sort of for the long haul. I started out as an apprentice under him and the people he works with, and I decided to still go to school. So shortly after I took that position with Sound Dogs Toronto, I went to school in London, Ontario in Canada, and the school I went to was Fanshawe College. They had a program called Music Industry Arts where I was going to learn how to record music. That was a focus for me at that point in time, but having been exposed to Sound Dogs, I gained an interest in post-sound for film, and so I kept sort of going back to that. During school, I would find myself more interested in the work that we were doing that was related to nonlinear sound for picture, and so I stuck around at school. There was a post-grad diploma that we could do, which at the time was called Digital Applications. I believe that it's actually audio post-production now because it's more focused on film. And so I stuck around for that and sort of rounded out a few new tools and things that I hadn't had exposure to. But ultimately in the summers I would go back and work for Sound Dogs. And so when I graduated, of course I went back, and the rest is kind of history. The rest of what I learned was on the job. And that's sort of my background in a nutshell. I will work in close connection with the director. In the case of Shape of Water, it was, fairly frequent review sessions or just spotting sessions. If they had a new element they wanted us to see, they would make sure that we came in. We would sit with the director and the picture editor, Sidney Walensky, and for the most part, we'll sit down in films with the director. In television, it's often the showrunner instead, because it's the unified mind behind the entire series. But yeah, in film, definitely we spend some time with the directors. The sound mix absolutely influences my approach to sound editing and design. That's one of those elements. The sound mix itself is sort of a crucial ingredient in sound design, just because when you gain the experience to understand what the mixers can do with the sounds after the fact, you begin to deliver to reflect that. So the sounds that we will prepare and bring to the stage will be prepared in such a way that they will be ergonomic for the mixer to make use of, easy for the mixer to find. The principle behind that is just the cleaner our tracks are and the easier they are to mix, the more, I shouldn't say easier, but the more ergonomic we can make them and the more efficient we can make them, the more time the mixer has to really massage the tracks that we provide. And the more time we give them to do that, the better they make us look. So it's kind of, it's very symbiotic that way. So we will deliver to make their life better, and in response, they can make our lives a little bit better by spending extra time and making it sound prettier. The layout of the speakers in a room, so whether we're mixing for 5.1, 7.1, or Atmos, it definitely has influence over how we will deliver our tracks to a theater. It gives us a bit of flexibility in terms of how much we can deliver to the theater. In terms of the creative implications, I guess it does. Yes, it does influence the creative implications, only because it opens up a few new opportunities. So if we're using a 5.1 track, then we know that we have only a certain number of speakers in the room to rely on to tell our story with sound. If we're dealing with Dolby Atmos, we have so many more. And so if we're trying to pipe 3 sounds through one speaker, one of those sounds is going to win out. 2 of those sounds have to sort of give way for that sound. if we can divide that sound across a few speakers and we can do it discreetly, we know that we'll be able to get all three of those sounds through in the mix. And so that ability to separate those sounds will give us a bit of it gives us a bit of wiggle room. So we can expand a little bit more. We can add extra details, but I would say that it's definitely worth asking if you're a sound designer, and worth informing if you are a director, your sound team. We should know going in if it's going to be Dolby Atmos versus 5.1, simply because the sound team who's familiar with editing in those formats will provide a different track if they know they have more speakers to expand into. There aren't any mix days that I'm not there, through the pre-mix all the way through the final mix. And the same can be said for the most part recently with even the picture editors, which is a huge help, because this is someone who has sat with the director more than almost anyone in the post world, right? And so they will sit in with us, and we'll just sort of make a lot of creative decisions, given the influence that we've collected from the director on the mix stage. And so yeah, it's pretty rare to have a mix day when the sound editor is not on stage.
The natives in the Amazon worshipped it like a god.
Get him out. What are you talking about? No.
We need to take it apart, learn how it works.
I don't want an intricate, beautiful thing destroyed.
My toughest job yet. I think the toughest job that I've done to date, I mean, the easy response is to say Shape of Water, because of the range we had to create emotionally for a character. That's something that's not as common for me. Most challenging, maybe technically the most challenging, I worked on a TV series called The Transporter, which was based on the film. And television turnaround is just a lot tighter, but that didn't really affect the action in the show. And so it was just sort of a constant barrage of car chases and gunfights and sound design sequences that we had to turn over on a weekly basis. So yeah, with the help of some friends and some in the industry and some colleagues, we pulled it off, but that was at the cost of a lot of sleep. Maybe second to that would be a TV series that followed not too long after that called The Strain, which Guillermo del Toro was the creator of, and that was our first exposure to him that led us to Shape of Water. And that one was just, I mean, it was a challenge. It was a creature film, but it was a creature series, but it was very filmic. It was very high detail. Yeah, it presented the challenges that sort of come with detail. So for the most part, I would say, in terms of challenge, technically, some of the television work I've done has been more challenging than feature work, because you have to divide your focus across multiple episodes of a show. From a creative standpoint, though, I'll give it to Shape of Water because of the range we needed to generate for that creature.
We can do nothing. I'm sorry.
Don't do this, Eliza.
What is she saying?
Don't do this.
Oh, God, it's not even human.
I am very fond of Shape of Water. It is a career highlight for me. I'm proud of it in every sense. I'm proud of the whole team. I had a whole crew of sound editors and sound designers and Foley artists that I had the privilege of working with on that show. And our team, it felt like the most seamless transition of collaboration between departments, even, because we had the full support of the vehicles department, the props department. Like it's not as common for me, at least, to have as much access to the other departments as I did in this one. And it was extremely inclusive. Everyone was very helpful, and it was an all-out team. Everyone was on the same team. Even like Guillermo and Miles, the producer, everyone was part of the same team. Everyone was pulling for the same goal. And so yeah, for more reason than one, like it's not just the technical and the creative implications. It's also the sort of the social implications of working on that job. It was just yeah, it was a real treat. The main difference between working in television versus working in feature film world would be, to me, it's focus. TV world, at least in my experience, I can't speak for everyone's experience of working in TV, but in my experience, TV can, the benefits to working in TV is you get some time to sort of flesh things out. You really get to work and rework the elements that are your signatures for that show. You can evolve those signatures, and you have a lot of time because a television series takes place over 10, 12, 16 episodes. So you can develop an arc through the TV series as long as that's in the writing and reflected there. You have a lot of time to sort of evolve your sounds and give them a purpose, where in film you spend more time on a single body of work, which to me is a benefit. The benefit to film is focus. I really enjoy being able to focus all of my creative integrity into a single piece of work, rather than dividing it over several installations of that piece of work the way that you do in television. It just means that it's a bit more front-loaded. You have to flesh things out more quickly, or at least bring them to maybe 90% completion before you get to the first temp mix in a film, just because you need to make sure that your director, the creatives, the producers are feeling comfortable with what you're bringing to the table. And so with film, you get to put almost the same amount of creative energy into a single body of work that you would otherwise spread out across 10 individual pieces of work in television. Yeah, it's less divided. It's nice to work on a single piece rather than, you're working on the next episode while you're mixing the current one. It can be a bit divided, and that has its benefits, but at least recently I've preferred working in film. Yeah, I do make a point of going out of my way as frequently as I can to go see movies that I've worked on, as well as movies that colleagues that I know have worked on, and even people I haven't worked with. I go to the theater as often as I can, because I feel like that's really the best way to set your bar. To hear what are other people doing. You can get inspired by it. You can be encouraged to try new things when you go to theaters and see and hear the tracks of some of the people that you look up to, and then and then when you inevitably get to meet those people, you've got something to talk about, which is really great. You can offer very specific praise and share new ideas based on what you've seen.